when I realized I wasn't going to do the stadium rock and arena rock like the Iron Maidens and all that,
right?
And I realized that I was going to go deeper. It definitely was a more to yourself, what would you call it, a mission, if you will, because it wasn't out there. You know, you had to really be an elite underground to even know of this type of music, which was thrash at that time, and to be able to play it with only knowing those few bands was a tough thing, but it was fun to dig that deep, and that's what got me into it. I was always trying to push the envelope a little bit more. So once I got the feel of the Metallicas and Slayers and King Diamonds and the Maiden, of course, once I got the feel of what they were doing, it was then easy for me to branch off, stay at that level, but now take my own personal, road to where I was going to go with it. And fortunate for me that there were musicians around me at a very young age who were on the same path. You know, we all were listening to the punk as well, like the Cro-Mags and name it. We listened to Cryptic Slaughter, and it was kind of like a movement because we were such an outcast that we wound up finding each other and making that stick. So all the bands that we did coming up were like a hardcore thrash, but it was all original hardcore thrash. We never played in any bands where we were playing other people's songs. Even at 15, 16, that was never what we did. So in turn, we naturally learned how to be who we were naturally supposed to be in the genre. And it turned out that the darker side, the thrash metal, eventually death metal side, was our natural way of going about it. So it was a long road, but it started for me learning what everybody else learned in my generation, and that was arena rock, with the big bands. And if you were into, that type of rock and roll and metal, then you stuck with that. And still to this day, you're a Maiden fan. You're out there.
Right, absolutely.
And I'm still a Maiden fan, but I also know there was a deeper side to how I was thinking.
Right.
And the music just fit that. And they just happened to label it death metal or aggressive metal, and so be it. That's where I feel comfortable.
So you might not even have known at the time that what you were doing was really pioneering death metal as far as what it is now. You guys were just playing together and making up your own shit.
We were just doing our natural routine. And,
that's awesome.
Fortunately for me and the band, all the musicians I played with, fortunately for me, my family is a heavy music-based family, and regardless if I was playing Motown, jazz, country, or whatever, they always made the house, the place where I could experiment with that. So the bands always practiced at my house, from very young. And my parents actually came up with the whole movement as well. Day one that I knew about it is the same day they knew about it.
Wow.
And still to this day, like when I was just recently in Suffocation, it was still my house where we practiced, played, and were based out of. So, coming up with a family like that, it was really my true blessing, because they were just so into music that it's not just death metal and extreme metal that I do. I know all music.
Wow.
Classical straight up has always been in my household, and I experimented with all of it. Now, talking about classical in that sense, I find that's the one that drew me the most, because it was the most original. You don't find new classical musicians coming out and reinventing classical. What they're doing is coming out and replaying the Bach, Beethoven, Mozart's. That's what they're doing. I always found that to be the most interesting in terms of studying music that there is. And the one music that I find closest to that is death metal, in sense of the technicality of the music being played. And it's not something that is going to be, let's say, reinvented. Death metal started one way, moved on, got more extreme or whatever, but it's not there to be reinvented. It's constantly just recirculating itself, staying as heavy as it naturally was. And the only other form of music that I know to do that is classical. So I think we're in pretty good, a pretty good position to just stay put. Stick to the guns.
A very interesting comparison. That's a very good point. So, do you think there are any modern day influential musicians that bands that are trying to play technical death metal can find inspiration from, or do you think that the best bands that are writing music now are still drawing inspiration from the same roots as what you guys were?
I'll never say that there's no musicians out there that have the next key, the next answer and that could teach us all. You know, they're there. But I do think if you ask these musicians, they'll still tell you where they're getting their inspiration from and where they're getting their standards, let's say.
Yeah.
As to how they're going to even begin to write. Okay, yeah. So with the bands that I see out now, young bands, I don't see them as, like I said earlier, as reinventing anything.
Right.
Especially in terms of, they say they may be influenced from, let's say, Morbid Angel or Suffocation or any of those bands, but you know what they need to be doing is, and it's really tough for them to do it, what they need to be doing is trying to reinvent, I don't want to say reinvent death metal as much as I would say invent a new form of music with, you know, death metal, thrash roots, but invent a new form of music. How they would do that, I couldn't possibly tell you, because as I said before, death metal is as close to classical. You don't see new classical musicians come out.
That's very true. Yeah.
And redefine what classical is. So right. It's not when death metal musicians have taken what we do to the extremes already.
Right.
So in terms of another band coming through and reinventing it, they may need to go just the opposite of extreme and figure out how to make it as, oh man, it's a tough mathematic process with even trying to explain that.
Right.
Much less play it, get noticed by it, and have your fan base that is now going to be loyal and follow you across the country. You know, it's extreme is here, and those who are in it understand it and understand it to the letter. Those who do not play it or listen to it have no idea what we're doing.
Right.
So we're still in, all of us, from old to brand new as yesterday, are still in this one cluster. All right. So they can go ahead and expand however they want. They could play math metal, doom metal, whatever they want. Until the world understands that we even exist, we're all in that same nutshell. So
that's true.
It's not necessarily needs to be reinvented or anything like that. It just needs to be from you. Right.
It seems to me that, in my humble opinion, Suffocation had such a perfect formula as far as, you know, really being the most extreme thing out there and technical, but still maintaining a sense of soul that I think was captured with classic rock and roll and blues, and I feel like that might be a quality that's gotten lost with trying to push to be faster and more extreme and more technical. That sense of soul is kind of gone.
I agree, and I think that's the biggest problem of it, and it's going to continue to keep us underground, if you will. If the other half of the world is indeed considered above ground, I do not know or not, but I know what we do is considered underground, and the more technicality we put to it, the more speed, the growling of the singers, that all keeps us in a common denominator where we're going to stay for quite some time, unless, of course, we make the underground everything it can be or is meant to be to ourselves, and we don't need anything other than that, you know.
Absolutely.
Which it is absolutely not there at the moment.
Right.
You know?